because I always thought of science fiction in the past, where I'm going to use the in the past, but it's not really in the past, where it was really strong in the science and the exploration of the ideas of science, right? What you guys are talking about, though, feels like you're shifting it a little ways. You're still focusing on the science, but you're much more focused on the human aspect.
Hey, it's Writers Row, where we talk about the writing community on Twitter. We talk about the business side of writing and the creative side. I am one of your hosts, DC Wright-Hammer, the author of the Between Two Minds series, science fiction thrillers. And I'm joined, as always, by my co-host,
David Gane. I am the author of the Shepherd and Wolf mystery series, which is a young adult adventure thriller mystery series. I was doing so good, and then it just fell apart. Darn it.
And for this episode, we are joined by a very special guest. I will let her introduce herself.
I'm Renée Hurteau, and I'm the author of the Antiquities Gate series, which is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi adult. So that's all I got.
Awesome. As always, if you viewers like what you're seeing here, make sure to subscribe to the channel, smash that like button. Go ahead and click it right now if you haven't. Just give it a little clicky with the mousey, or if you're on your phone with your fingy. Do that now, because it's going to help the show. We're going to put out more content. Things are going to get better. So please help us out.
And if you don't, he'll keep on using those kind of weird words. And please help us out.
Yes. Yes. And right now people are thinking, blink twice, David, if you're, under coercion or anything like that. So he blinked.
I blinked
too many times. I don't know what that means.
That's Morse code. We have to figure it out.
Yeah. What are we talking about today, DC?
We are going to talk about, we brought Renée on specially so we could talk about the genre of science fiction, something near and dear to my heart. Basically, we were thinking about, what are we going to talk about in this episode? And we know we've been trying to get to genres. We did horror before because that's a good one. But science fiction, we eventually had to come around to. I wanted to bring on another science fiction author, so I'm really excited for this. David?
What?
I'm really excited.
You?
Excited.
Okay, good. I'm happy for you.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I feel a little not overwhelmed, but because I don't have enough of a science fiction background. I don't even know if I've written any science fiction. So I'm just going to ask a lot of questions. And
I like that.
How is that different than any other episode, David?
I do all the time. So, yeah.
The Inquisitor.
Yeah. So, okay. Let's try and figure this out. First of all, what do you guys define as science fiction? I know
you can take that one, DC.
Well, we both have definitions, I'm sure, and I'll give a brief one because I'm interested to hear what you have to say, Renée. But essentially, what's the next step? What's the next step for science? What's the next step for humanity? And that step could be a small step. What's the next small step in the future? Or what's the next big step? When we're talking in the hundreds and thousands of years in the future, you go from that to what I write, which is more speculative, decades in the future. And so I think that's kind of the way I define it. Like, what is next for humanity? And I think that kind of question is what has driven science fiction since the beginning. That's kind of my perspective on it.
Okay, I want to let Renée answer, but I really want to ask you. You use the word speculative. What do you mean by that?
So speculative is softer, or depending on how you look at it. Some people are really into science fiction, and it has to have like spaceships. It's got to have different species. It's got to have this like sort of almost a fantastical side to it. Whereas speculative, depending on who you talk to and how they define it, can be more concrete science, can be literally based on what you speculate to be the next steps or the next things that are coming. So you sort of speculate into the future, and you try to keep it realistic. You try to keep it grounded in the physics and the science that we know today, and you just try to take the next leap, and you try to build that as part of your world building. Your world building isn't as extensive as other world building in some cases with speculative fiction, because you're literally just taking that small step into the future, as opposed to making leaps and bounds and trying to come up with whole new races and different things like that. So I guess that's what I mean by speculative.
Okay. And Renée, how do you want to build on?
Well, I definitely agree with everything DC said. For me, science fiction can encompass, like, they've got so many subgenres. There's time travel, dystopian, parallel realities, and it's a huge category the same way that fantasy is. I guess every genre is a huge category, but I think that for me, sci-fi was defined by Star Trek because that's the first interaction I ever had with sci-fi, and for me, everything was compared to Star Trek. So I love watching sci-fi more than I like reading sci-fi. I like to read fantasy, and I think that I'm going off on a tangent already. First question, I'm going off on a tangent. But I don't know. I wanted to write a sci-fi book that felt like watching a sci-fi show. I like to just see the ship and not have to read, all the technical details of how it was put together and stuff like that. So it's more character driven, and the sci-fi atmosphere is sort of it's inconsequential, really. Like, it's a sci-fi book, but it's driven by the characters, not by what the ship is made of and the uranium coating and stuff like that. So I like a lighter sci-fi that's more like watching a show instead of reading the details. That's for me.
And now, just because you brought it up, and I heard this a long time ago, is there a difference between science fiction and sci-fi? Because I've heard there is.
I don't know. I just say sci-fi because it's easier to say than science fiction. It takes less time. So
yeah,
I don't know. It's not for me, but I know I'm wrong about a lot of things.
So I've heard different takes on that. Like, sci-fi is more futuristic, farther in the future, whereas if you really emphasize the science part of science fiction, you're really talking more about the shorter term speculative fiction. In some cases, hard science fiction is supposed to be basically as truthful as you can up into the point where you have to leap into the fiction portion of it, basically almost like a scientific hypothesis into the future, what we think might be discovered if we took something to the next step. And so, and the other side of the other thing that people say, the more anecdotal one, is if you use sci-fi, people see that if you describe your work as sci-fi, they see that as being more amateuristic if you don't declare it as science fiction. I've heard that on Twitter. There was a whole thread about if you abbreviated sci-fi, you clearly are an amateur, you don't know what you're talking about. I don't subscribe to that. I think that that's, I don't know, elitism in the most petty way. Like, really, you're going to pick apart somebody's description of a genre to try to put them in some kind of category. I think as long as you're conveying what your genre is, if you're conveying what your story is about, it doesn't matter, especially when you're limited to 280 characters on Twitter. Like, just, get out what you can get out. It doesn't matter.
And so Renée kind of mentioned that you kind of were brought in through Star Trek. Is there any other science fiction that has kind of defined what you write or what you enjoy?
Well, as far as television goes, I love Star Trek and I love Stargate. Stranger Things is one of the newer ones. I love Stranger Things. some of my readers have said that my book has an 80s vibe, and that's like the biggest compliment I could have ever been given. Fringe, Defiance, those are all my favorite. I've taken little elements of everything that I love from those, but probably Ray Bradbury is probably my favorite to read. I've always loved his short stories. The Illustrated Man, I think, was my favorite. And Kurt Vonnegut. I don't know if you've read Kurt Vonnegut, but I was fascinated when I picked up his books, and they had this sort of stream of consciousness way of writing. Like he'd say what was going to happen in the end and the beginning, and just flip to like what the narrator's actually thinking in real life, and then back to the story. And he fascinated me. So those are some of my biggest influences. I want to write like Kurt Vonnegut, but my husband won't let me. He says it's too confusing to be inside my brain. So none of that coming.
You don't think you'll do maybe even a short story or something like that to dabble with it?
I have written some short stories like that, but I don't think they'll see any readers, just me.
Okay.
You should just, this is totally sideline of the sci-fi, but yeah, definitely you should at least send them out to some beta readers and just see what the feedback is on.
What if they don't like the inside of my brain?
Okay, then you know.
Then you were
there
confirmed
is something
right.
wrong with you.
You were confirmed right that you shouldn't get it out there. No, it's just the beta reader's opinion. But no, the opportunity is that it might actually be good, or maybe it needs just a little bit of work. Who knows? So.
And what about you?
Don't confuse me. I'm in the middle of a series. I have to finish what I started.
No,
that's a good idea too. So
you have to have more than one whip. I'm not going to pluralize that this episode. That's an inside joke, and it's a bad one. But
the inside joke to this show, right?
Yes.
So you have to watch all the episodes to get it.
Yes, you have to piece together you have to watch all of them first off. And then, no.
We've been secretly putting out a secret code through this entire show.
I like Easter eggs. I have watched not all of the episodes, so I'll have to start at the beginning and take notes.
No. Okay, DC, let's get back on topic.
How did Renée go crazy? She watched all of Writer's Row. Anyway, influences that I've had. I think, I don't know. I grew up in the 80s, and I watched Transformers. I watched Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I watched Ghostbusters. I watched all these cool cartoons that they all have a science fiction aspect to them that you don't even really think about. You're like, oh, that's just a cartoon, that's fiction. But a lot of them were really science fiction. And it starts to come to a head when you get into some of the movies, when they started to make them motion pictures and they try to explain the origins, and they tried to, come up and yeah, there's the paranormal aspect to Ghostbusters, but we know how nerdy Egon Spengler was and is, and we know how nerdy even the new iteration. I haven't seen the new Ghostbusters yet, but there's a science fiction aspect to that. And so with that in mind, then I grew into watching a lot of movies like Alien, Terminator, Predator. Those series really inspired me growing up. I actually, and I've said this in a lot of different episodes, I wasn't a strong reader growing up, so I really had movies and TV shows to work with. And I think the turning point for me, which was really quite neat, is when I ran into Michael Crichton, first in the form of a movie in Jurassic Park. And, I'll never forget the line from Ian Malcolm where he says in the movie, your scientists, they thought about whether they could, but they didn't stop and think about whether they should. And just that kind of mindset I bring into my science fiction. I think really where the intersections of power, money, and science, how that triangle tends to not go well for, the majority of people. It might benefit a few power brokers here or there working behind the scenes, or some shadowy people. But then what's the bigger picture? What's the impact? I think that's the other side of it. What's the impact of these technological and scientific discoveries on the greater picture on humanity in general. I think Crichton did that a lot in his books, and I actually went back and started to read a lot of his books to really see where he was coming from, not through the lens of a Steven Spielberg or something like that, but directly from him. And I think that's where a lot of my inspiration has come from, is that type of writing and that type of science fiction.
That's interesting because both of you are drawing a lot more from TV and movies and that sort of thing than actual literary science fiction. Do you think that is that, have you noticed if that's a trend that's occurring with other authors, or is this just you two and you two alone?
I honestly don't know. I definitely think it flavors the writing differently. But what I was trying not to get on a tangent before about is that I love reading fantasy for certain reasons, and I liked watching sci-fi, and I didn't like reading a lot of sci-fi. So I was trying to write a sci-fi book that was what I would want to pick up and read, And so I guess just the television influenced me in different ways because I enjoyed watching it. I enjoyed the characters more than I enjoyed when I had to read a really long, intricate description of something. I repeat myself a lot, I'm sorry. But basically, yeah. I mean, I don't know if a lot of writers are like that, but I'd love to talk to them because that would be awesome.
And I think I don't know that I've run it. I do feel ill-equipped when I talk to other science fiction writers. They're like, oh, what about this book and that book and that book? And I've read some. I haven't read a lot. But I think a lot of what Renée is saying is very much my take as well, that, what is the human response to being put in a situation with this science fiction, making the science fiction sort of the glue that holds the story together, but the story, the character development, all of that's rolled up into moving it forward is, what's the human response? How does that take sane, rational people that, or in some cases other species or other, life forms and whatnot, but enough to where the reader can relate to it and get through the story. That's what draws me in, is where I can relate, I can buy into whoever the main characters are, and I want to see them through some kind of journey or some kind of experience. And so I think TV and movie is great for that. It's very much main character oriented. It's driven by dialogue, so it's very character driven in that sense. And, as we've gotten better with CGI and things like that, they can really immerse you into futuristic and very cool looking science fiction. And on that note, one thing I'll say is that the tablet computer has ruined most futuristic science fiction, because it's basically in every science fiction they've got a piece of glass and they have like a hologram on it, and it's like, well, that's basically an iPad with a clear back. It's like not that futuristic anymore. So I just thought that was funny.
I think another really cool thing, going back to what you said before about what's the next step and things like that, I think sci-fi or science fiction, I apologize, is the perfect platform for exploring parallels with what we're dealing with as a society and in the world today. And it's a lot easier to take someone who feels really strongly about something and doesn't want to listen to other people's opinions about something. And if you make it about an alien species, or if you make it about, someone on another planet, it's just an alien species. It's easier for people to see both sides of an argument and look at it from an outside perspective and see maybe where people can come together and agree. There's a lot of subtext in my book about things going on in the world today that, I'm not shoving anything down people's throats, and I'm not saying what my opinion is. It's just you can see both sides without actually looking at the actual problem that we're dealing with. So I think that's another cool thing with sci-fi that's really easy to do.
And I know DC's is similar in that way, where he's taken, and I've heard you in another interview talk about this, where you've pushed it forward in the future, but you really don't define how much, and it's more exploring the consequences of the situation now into the future. Is that accurate, DC?
Yeah. Basically, and I think science fiction provides that perfectly provides that avenue of, if trends continue, what does that look like in 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now if trends continue? Because we often will hear blurbs, we'll get articles, science fiction or science journals, science reality saying, oh, like for instance, greenhouse gases and the heating of the earth. They're saying, oh, we're on a 30-year time clock where the earth will be this much hotter, which means that this much ice melts, which means that coastal lines and things like this, and all these repercussions. And I think it can be very overwhelming, and it can be very scary, and people will file that away, and they don't necessarily act on it. They don't think about it. It's just sort of a fear that gets filed away. And when we can bring some of that to life in science fiction, I think science fiction writers can be advocates for change, in that, yeah, it might not look like this exactly. This might be completely embellished just to get the point across, but it gives you an idea. It lets that little bit of fear kind of run wild in the universe or the world that you've created. And it can inspire people to, take action now rather than waiting for a science fiction, a dystopian type future to become a reality.
Because I always thought of science fiction in the past, where I'm going to use in the past, but it's not really in the past, where it was really strong in the science and the exploration of the ideas of science, right? What you guys are talking about, though, feels like you're shifting it a little ways. You're still focusing on the science, but you're much more focused on the human aspect in dealing with that science. And I'm wondering if that's the ongoing trend, or if maybe because of the situation of the science, you're like, okay, how do we explain it better, or how do we explore it better, is maybe the better phrasing. Is that an accurate assumption? That, because it feels like both of you have kind of moved towards more character-based rather than science-based, right? And
I think that a lot of the subgenres, definitely are moving towards that. A lot of the stuff you read that's more recent is, well, not even all more recent, but yeah, I definitely think it's moving towards, the repercussions, the human side of the equation, because of the science, like DC was saying, because of all the things that we have right now, the things that, we can do versus what we should be doing. I definitely think that it's more of a, the direness that we sometimes feel is more in the forefront of our minds. And so, writers want to write about what they feel strongly about. And a lot of us have some very strong feelings.
Well, and I think, I haven't done a ton of reading, but I know there's a lot out there where they do talk about, as Renée was saying, they get into the alloy that's used in the ship and where it was mined, and they get into a lot of side stories about how, the whole, this fleet of this pirate, these space marines, things like that, how they came to be, and they get into a lot of backstories, and it's very high level, very setting the stage and getting into a lot of these details. And then a lot of times they will zoom in and bring it into the main characters and tell the story from that way. And I think, that's perfectly fine. I think there's definitely an audience out there for that. That's a big portion of science fiction. I think while I'm a science fiction writer right now, there's a lot of aspects of mystery. There's thriller aspects, psychological aspects. And I feel like I was a data migration specialist when I wrote Between Two Minds, and it's about migrating somebody's mind. It's taking their mind, digitizing it, and putting it into a new body. And so I kind of took the profession I was in, made it science fiction, applied it to the human mind, and then filled in the story from there. But I feel like I could write. I'm dabbling in my mind about fantasy. I'm thinking about doing like horror or something like that. And a lot of the other aspects of my writing would come out in there. And I think I didn't want to be just a science fiction writer. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I wanted to be, first off, a good writer, and I wanted the science fiction to help with that, sort of bolster the things I was doing.
So then it feels like that first version that you were kind of describing is much more about the world building aspect of science fiction. Mm-hmm. And then there's the science aspect of science fiction, and then the human aspect, or the not even the human aspect, because it doesn't even need to be, it could be an alien and it could be our main character. So that emotional connection, that, or the I'm just going to stay with the emotional connection that we as readers have to the characters. So mm-hmm. It almost feels like there's those three different kind of segments that are combining or can be shifted between. So interesting. Thank you. Do you have any questions, DC, that I haven't asked? I kind of been hogging it.
I mean, so you do young adult crime mystery, and you said you haven't written sci-fi. I guess the question is, from somebody who hasn't written sci-fi, what appeals to you about the genre? Do you ever think you would actually write something in it, David?
I would always consider it. Like you guys, I'm very much character based, but I also like the hard research. So I would probably want to do something where I just did a deep dive into a subject and explored it really well, and then built a story around whatever I've kind of researched. So yeah, I'd probably lean into the science a bit. But the thing that always keeps me away is, if I wanted to do it, I'd have to do it well. And I feel like the learning curve is so steep that I kind of shy away from it in general because of that. But then, that's only one part of the genre. So there's plenty of other places for me to swim around in that sea. So
I could see you doing something with time travel, like, crime.
Don't mess it up, though. Everybody messes up.
I've seen people getting yelled at on Twitter about messing up time travel, so maybe I should avoid that one too.
I think you could do it. I mean, Renée, you've got, is there 2 books in the series that are coming out that you wrote? Is that?
Actually, the first 4 are going to be coming out one a month from now till November. So okay. Those are ready.
And so, what was the name of the series again for the viewers?
Antiquities Gate.
Okay.
Say that again.
Antiquities Gate.
Okay. Awesome. And it'll be in the Doodly-Doo, or put your website, right?
Doodly-Doo it, yep.
In the Doodly-Doos.
And the pre-order on Amazon, I saw that. I think we got a minute. I want to ask her, so you're doing a rapid release. Is that the way it's described?
I am. I've been working on it for years, and I have this entire series outlined, and I know that I hate waiting for books in a series that I'm excited about, and I'm a nobody, and I wanted people to feel confident that, I wasn't going to self-publish this one book and never come out with another one, and they'd never find out what happened. So I also did some research into marketing and found that a lot of it, your advertising just gets sunk on the first book. And I thought, if I have a couple of them out already, and you can get some of that profit from the read through when people enjoy it. So just a lot of aspects. I want to get them out there. They're ready. I can't nitpick them anymore. I gotta let them fly. So I'm really excited about that. I hope my grandma reads them. I wrote them for my grandma because she doesn't read sci-fi, and I want my family to be nerds. So that's really why I write science fiction that's like character based, and I just want to turn everyone into nerds because it's such an enjoyable pastime. So.
It literally is going to be a gate to science fiction for your family.
I see what you did there.
Circle. Well,
I'm ready for you to do the whole thing, but I'm a little disappointed, to be honest.
No, that's the story of my life. Thank you, Renee, for coming on and talking science fiction with David and me for just a little bit. We really appreciate it. Anything else? I'm definitely going to put your pre-orders, the links, and all that in the description.
I'm not even worried about it. I'm just happy to be here.
Yay! David, you got anything to be a huckster for?
Just Kunyos and Gane. That's kunyosandgane.com. You'll find all our books there, find links to where you can buy it on Amazon and all the other different stores. And as we still have a bit of merch left, and a couple of other authors like DC listed on our website as well. So,
yep. I will push Wright-Hammer.com, and I'm going to put in the description. I have a code for free shipping in the U.S. I will put that in the description down below. So if you want to order autographed copies of the Between Two Minds series, you're able to do that at Wright-Hammer.com and get free shipping. So thanks, everyone, for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.